Turn off your lights. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. I believe I was targeted by human traffickers. By spirituaIbox. I, 20 female, work part-time at a small business in my local mall and usually work alone. I am a sales associate, so I'm required to talk to customers and encourage them to buy things. It was the last hour of my shift when a creepy man came in. He was about mid-40s and everything about him was odd. I.e., clothes didn't fit, expensive shoes, socially awkward. He originally asked a pretty standard question about a less expensive item that I happily answered. After this, though, he continued to ask questions almost as if he wanted to keep my attention to him. He then asked if he can try out our most expensive item in the store, which is a massage chair, and I say yes. We let everyone try it out. At this point, I just thought he was an innocent yet socially awkward guy. He gets in the chair to try it out and continues to ask unusual questions. We chit-chat a bit and I tell him the massage chair's features and the price of it. All of a sudden, the questions get more personal. He asked me what high school I went to and if I missed it. Me being naive, I said the high school I went to and that I didn't miss going. He said some story about a teacher I never heard of and said he missed high school a lot. He asked if I lived around there, in which I avoided the question, but implied that I lived close. He then repeatedly asked me the price of the chair and asked me to calculate the price along with our second most expensive item in the store. I thought he was fully interested and was convinced he was about to buy it. We made commission on the chair, so I ignored his creepiness because I wanted to make the sale. He keeps insisting that he needs to walk out with the chair today, and he has a truck that is big enough to hold it. It seemed I finally answered his questions to his liking because I was able to walk away a bit. He then made a phone call and started describing how I look, my age, where I live approximately, and what store I work at. He then said to the person on the phone, "We got one. We got one." I had suspicion that he was creepy, but this confirmed it. I asked him from behind the cashier's counter, "You're not talking about me, right?" He shook his head no. He then stood up from the chair and said he will not be buying the chair today. I was so scared and alone. No one else around but me and him. I ran to the back and grabbed all my stuff and pulled out my pocket knife. He then left the store and hung out right outside the only entrance/exit. I didn't want to leave, but I couldn't stay inside the mall. I waited for him to go out of sight and then quickly locked the store doors and ran outside to my car. I called my manager and she said I had to close the store properly, turn off the lights, and count the register. So she told me to go into the nearby store in the mall and call for a security escort. I did that, was escorted back to the store to close up, and was escorted back to my car with no further incident. I live in a city with one of the highest rates of human/sex trafficking in the country. Was I being targeted by human traffickers? Edit. I appreciate all the support and education on human trafficking and how they target their victims. When I wrote this post, I was not educated on the topic, and that was the first thing that came to mind when I had this encounter. I realize now that this was not human trafficking, but still a scary encounter nonetheless. Because I would like to have some clarification for you guys about what actual human trafficking looks like, I'm going to read a comment from down below. Good Cause 2679 wrote, "I work in anti-human trafficking field, so I like to chime in here. First of all, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. I'm sure this was terrifying. You did the right thing by walking away from the man and calling for an escort to assist you. In my opinion, this is just another creepy guy who is odd and has no social skills. Yes, these type of people can scare the heck out of us and intimidate us because we don't know how to interact with them or know their exact intentions. But as far as human trafficking goes, this does not line up with how human trafficking works. Kidnapping, yes, but human trafficking, no. Let me explain. Human traffickers groom their victims over a period of time. Could he be starting this process with you? Maybe. Please don't give him any more information about yourself. Grooming is wining and dining their victims, buying them expensive items, telling them positive things about themselves, and building them up, and having them eventually trust the trafficker to the fullest extent. After this, the traffickers will convince the victim that they can't live without them. At this point, the victims are convinced and they go. The traffickers then have full control over their victims. Drugs usually enter the picture, and whatever type of trafficking starts to take place. For young women, it's typically sex trafficking. This is extremely hard for victims to escape due to being dependent on the traffickers, drugs, and fear of the traffickers. So again, as scary as it was for you, I do believe this was a creepy/old guy. His phone call was most likely to freak you out. I do advise you that if he comes back, discreetly get a photo of him and call your manager before you become too uncomfortable. Possibly even call mall security and ask them to come to your store and just observe. I hope this helps. Sorry that this took away from the stories, but I did want to showcase more closer to what human trafficking really looks like and a better way of actually protecting yourself from it. It's important we trust people, but we also have to be careful who we trust. And I'm going to take words from a podcast I listen to quite a bit. Be weird, be rude, stay alive, and always trust your gut. Now, with all that being said, let's get back to the stories. My brother remains oddly silent ever since he returned from the party last night, but I know he's not mad when he gently gives me today's paper. Studies reveal a new, highly contagious disease that causes immense pain in its victims and disables their speech so it can continue spreading. A Possible Pedophile Encountered Years Ago by Bibble206. I was 11 at the time, still young and carefree as a normal kid. I don't remember much about how or what happened because it's one of those memories that you just seem to forget as time goes on. But I will try to describe in best details as I possibly can. It was in the 6th grade, about to be into middle school years. My school gym was having a wrestling practice at the time. I didn't join it because I had forgotten to give my parents a permission slip to join before the deadline. But one day, the instructors, 2 girls who were teaching the class, decided to let some of the kids who didn't join come and practice for free. I guess for the fun of it, or there weren't enough students in the group. So I decided to go with my friends, and it was fun at first. We were taught ways to tackle someone to the ground and such. At one moment, I noticed one of the ladies was looking at us boys weirdly. Not in a way of watching us so that we were doing the moves properly, more in a observing, attracting kind of way. I didn't think much of it, so I went back to practicing the technique moves with my partner. Eventually, we were doing a workout, and I was on my hands and knees bending over on the mat, trying to do some sort of push-up we were doing to help us better, when I suddenly felt a slight tap on my back. I looked up in confusion to see one of the instructors kinda hovering over me, staring down at me that made me a bit uncomfortable. She looked like she was smiling just a smidge, and from what I remember, she gave me a subtle wink. I found it kind of off-putting, but yet again, I didn't think much of it and went back to doing my exercises. After the lesson was over, I felt kind of weirded out with that lady. She honestly gave me the creeps, but I just brushed it off. She and her colleague were only there for about 2 weeks, and I never saw them again. It wasn't until sometime after that I realized she could have been acting like that quite possibly due to some weird attraction pedophilia. I honestly didn't know what to think, and maybe I misunderstood and overreacted and thought wrong about her. I didn't tell anyone about it, and even if I did, it wouldn't have been a big deal as there was no proof of it being true. There were no witnesses, and I never even caught her name. It still confuses me. I'm not so hung up on it nowadays. It didn't affect me badly in any way. But I still feel quite guilty over it, and that it still sits in my mind as a weird but vague memory. I know it's not your average scary story, but I was only a kid still, so I didn't understand the whole meaning of it till I got older and learned of what older people can do to such young and innocent children, and that to me is chilling enough. It also taught me the importance of being aware of those around you, because you never know what they are capable of. This was 6 years ago, and the thing that disturbs me the most about this whole thing is how she could have possibly been deviant later on, or even acting on her sexual desires to others unexpectedly and getting away with it. And I did nothing to speak up about it. After I watched my parents brutally gunned down in an alley, I made a promise to conduct a never-ending crusade of justice on crime wherever it may hide. I soon found out I was not brave enough for this work, but I knew if I recreated this event enough times, I would eventually find a child who is. I don't know if I would have made it out of the woods if I had done what he wanted me to do. By Sweet Tangerine. Hello, I just came across this subreddit, and gosh, some of these are terrifying. I do have a story of something that happened to me from a long while ago, but in hindsight, it was really dumb of me, and I feel terribly dumb now. So I've always been hesitant to tell a lot of people I know about it. Except for my psychologist, LOL. And I always apologize for long posts, so it's so hard not to here. There were some other conversations had with this man named John. It was mostly him talking. But I left some of them out for length's sake. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30, 2 a.m. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we gotten home, he tossed me out onto the front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn for the party, and it was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him. So I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside of the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, though he didn't have many, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead, I decided I would try to walk to the gas station and motel, which is like a little less than a mile away. so I could use their phone to try and call my girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. Ironically enough, the road I was walking on is called Donor Pass Road, so the freezing cold was fitting. But anyway, a little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stop and begin to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I was just about frozen up, but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me and this guy rolled down his window and asked me what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride, and I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, "Well, good, I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though, you just look like someone who needs some help." He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials, and when he offered me a ride again, I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me and I hopped in. The radio was low. It was a little messy. The ashtray was full of cigarettes. There were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I moved my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight-colored bandana, and some other things. He apologized, saying that it was a truck he took hunting, but it was super warm, so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked me why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attractive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him and he told me about his family. He was a young dad, had a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog. I told him it was like he had the perfect little family, and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then it sort of clicked for me to ask him if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save the battery. We were approaching the gas station and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one," but he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding. I started getting choked up. My eyes started tearing up as I was looking out the windows, watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing, "Never go to the second location." But I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle, and how it'd be a lot harder to get away with one foot as to opposed to two, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground, but then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared though, like there was nothing but trees and an empty road and us. I was crying pretty bad at this point and asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I don't know why I even asked, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started to talk underneath his breath. "Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me. dressed like a slut, and other derogatory things. As he kept saying these terrible things, too many to type out here, I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remember the pair of handcuffs I remembered seeing under the papers beneath my feet, so I used that little, I don't know how to describe it, like scoopy motion. I managed to use my feet to scoop his handcuffs up and use my heels and toes to push them under the bottom of my seat as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try and help myself, like if we were close to some upcoming lights or structures, if I even made it to them. I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them, or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be drunk driver and we get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night and how if I did anything it would hurt him. But I told myself that sort of thinking sort of got me into this mess. He pulled off the road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooden trees were closer to the road. On mine, there were small gaps fully covered in thick, I don't know how many feet of snow, before the trees thickly picked up maybe 10 or 16 yards away. He turned off the car and coldly said there was something wrong with the car and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him, because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and he shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I'd ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He stared at me in this, way I can't even describe it to this day. I don't even know how to start. He got back in the car, and I sank towards the window, scared he would drag me out over the console. He turned off the headlights, and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting a cigarette and looking out his window and looking back at me and then back out his window again. He heard me shuffling my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window, told me if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. And oddly enough, I was sort of thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of this car, then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise, he could chase me or shoot me. In case he had a hunting rifle in the back, I didn't dare look. I'm glad I was right. I think at that point, I sort of hit some sort of bottom of my reserves, and instead of panic, there was a numbness and exhaustion. There were still an occasional hot tear or two, but I just remember being numb. I talked to a psychologist about this sort of thing, and he thinks it just came from my ex-boyfriend giving me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audible told him that my friend was still waiting for me, and asked him about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children, and that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about, and he said, "I'm thinking about what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily. He just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked back up to a cry at that point, and he told me not to cry and turned the car on, offering me some heat. I just cried and said I wanted to go home. Eventually he started driving and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, He told me not to tell anyone or he would find me. Then he told me he was just teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changed his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down out of the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped and remembered to try and see his license plate. I turned around but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fear melted away when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number that I had caught, the fact he said he was an off-duty cop, just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out, saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I would be able to look, and the officer said no, and asked me if I didn't trust him, and I told him of course I did. The officer gave me a ride to my friends, lecturing me for hitchhiking, consisting in him repeatedly asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. Of course I knew. I was just naive to think it could never happen to me, and I was desperate for some warmth. I never heard anything back about the report that was made, so I would try to follow up, and each time I did, they never got back to me aside from the one time I was told my case number didn't exist. But that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years, I asked my friend, whose house I slept over at that night, if she had ever heard any, weirdness or anything since that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she always says no. So I sort of let it go and try to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again. So it was a lesson. It certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with my case. I never heard any other odd experiences up there. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself all that to help me sleep better at night. It all felt really real. Even if it wasn't real, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night. This has also been super therapeutic to let out, so thank you so much for listening to me. Also, I'm not really the biggest fan of the few of you trying to inbox me saying you're John. So if you could maybe not, that would be super neat. Thank you. I usually enjoy eating meat because the images of their happiest moments flood my mind. Chuckling with their family, dancing in the mud, frolicking through the fields. But I spat my burger out with a panic when I remembered the tears in my meat's eyes as they were handed their high school diploma. "Rot in hell, you cheating pig!" I yelled at my husband as I reached for the letter opener. "You really thought I wouldn't notice you collecting $300 after passing go?" I whispered in his ear before thrusting the blade through his chest. I was kidnapped by Heavy Goal 8698. I have been clean from all drugs since 2019. It took me a while to write this, and I never thought I would post it because of how stupid I was and the stupid mistakes I made. I know I will get a lot of dog comments on here, so just don't even say it because I already know. I'm telling this story to remind people that everyone's intentions are not what they say they are. I am mentally traumatized from this experience, and I get reminded of it every day. I am grateful to be alive, and I have no idea what would have happened if I didn't get away when I did. So save the rude and cruel comments. Thanks. The story is based in September 2017, I believe. Everything's such a fucking blur. I did whatever I could to survive in the harsh world. So please, no judgment. I was on the streets, with no family, and an active crack soon-to-be meth addiction. A little backstory. I started using crack in 2015 and figured out that if I sold my body, I could make easy money. I know, not ideal, but I was deep in my addiction, and at that point I didn't care about anything. But in January 2017, I met Ty, who also smoked crack but worked every day, so I no longer had to do that. I was going on like 8 months free from selling my body and soul. Also, when I met Ty, he had a place in the big city, and we did a lot of work for people in this city. I was left on the streets by the man I thought I loved at the time. I must have said something wrong because he flipped out and left with everything I owned in his truck. Fuck, we just spent days getting high, and I was sure he was just throwing a fit, so I went over to my friend's, let's call him E's house. It was my home away from home, and I felt safe there. E was an older, maybe 6-year-old man who liked getting high, and over time became one of my best friends. I was able to take a shower and put on clean clothes. When I was all done, I remember sitting on the couch with disbelief that Ty would leave me like that. I started crying and wishing things had been different, while E held me and comforted me. I knew deep down that I needed a fresh start, to depend on myself and live a happy life. Across the street from E's house was a hometown bar where rappers and musicians would perform, and on that particular night, the bar had been filled with people from the bigger city about a half an hour away. Let me explain. Where I come from, there isn't really a place for addicts to go and get clean. They do have a women's shelter, which I have been to before, about 30 minutes away in the bigger city, where they had all the help you can ask for, if you're willing to do the work. At this point, I was ready to get away from everyone and everything. I had no hope of cleaning up my life if I stayed anywhere close to where I was using. Remember, you have to remove old playmates, playthings, and playgrounds, so that's what I need to do. I went right over to that bar and found a semi-good-looking guy heading back to the city I needed to go to. I told him I was planning to go to the shelter in the morning, and he told me I could go with him and he will take me in the morning. On the ride, I remember feeling like a whole 100 bricks were lifted off my shoulders. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and an Obama phone with no minutes. I asked the guy I was with that was driving. Had a pretty sweet ride, by the way. I said, "You don't fuck with this, right?" And I pulled out my crack pipe. He shook his head, so I rolled down the window and just let it go. I knew that I was going into the shelter and I had to get better. Not just for me, but I had kids and a family that at that time still hoped I would get better. I wanted to start over. I just didn't know how hard it was going to be. Me and this random dude go to his friend's house, we smoke a blunt, and I don't remember anything after that. I woke up on the floor of a clean room. And I mean clean, there was nothing in it. It smelled like paint. As I looked around, I realized this was the place the dude was talking about moving into and renting. I got up and he took me to get a coffee and right over to the shelter. I was fucking terrified of what I was going to walk into. I had no idea what to expect. All I knew was I needed to better my life and I needed to do it now. As we drove into downtown, I got a little nervous because I knew downtown was full of crime and drug dealers. Big buildings and confusing signs, tons of people and traffic. I then realized I was going to have to work really hard to get my life back. We pulled on the street, and before I knew it, he was dropping me off. There I was, standing in this big, beautiful, clean lobby, just feeling lost and broken. I had been with Ty for almost 7 months, and this was the first time he left me like this, so I was kinda hurt over that. I knew he had been seeing someone else in our recent month of breakup, and he wasn't afraid to show it. The lobby smelled like lime with spotless white walls. I walked up to the desk, and I was asked if I was homeless. Yes, I said, and she didn't even ask any questions. She just looked at me with sad eyes and said, "Okay, hon, let's get you set up." She took me to a small room full of boxes as she handed me one. She explained it was my personal things, toiletries, etc. I looked at her with unsettling eyes and replied that I didn't have any belongings, that I had lost everything the night before. The nice lady gave me some toiletries and a pair of leggings. Next was the intake, where I had to answer a bunch of questions and was handed a paper with all the rules on it. And on the top of the paper, it stated that there was no Wi-Fi in or around the building. You had to go down to the stop sign to get internet. My phone was off, but I could still use Wi-Fi, but at that time, I wasn't really that worried about it. I knew Ty was already probably staying with that other girl. Michelle was her name, so I didn't feel like it was necessary to even try to use my phone. I decided to cut off everyone and try to be different. When she was done giving me the rundown on how things work, she took me into the day room. Walking from the lobby was weird. I remember feeling sick going through those double doors with stairs off to the left. Under the stairs was a pile of mats. I was told to grab one. I followed her through another set of double doors into the day room, which was huge. It was filled with at least 50 females, a lot of older ladies with nowhere to go, but it was loud and bright. The wall to my left was full of lockers, which I was told I would get one if I stayed there long enough, and in front of that wall was about 10 to 15 round tables, set up where most of the girls were sitting playing cards, coloring, and talking. On the other side of the room was the shower/bathroom, and a small TV that sat on a cart with wheels on it. Next to the cart was an end table that had a power strip full of chargers and phones. In the far back right corner was a door that led outside to go smoke. It was nice there. There was picnic tables and lawn chairs set up with a huge fence in the yard for the kids to play in. When 7 p.m. hit, the whole dynamic of the room changed. Everyone was moving around, people were running in, and then you hear it over the speaker. Roll call. Then we were instructed to go and get one mat to sleep on. They passed out blankets and pillows to those who were without, and they let us keep the TV on. The first night was scary and lonely. Here I was in a strange place, not even 2 full days cleaning off a week-long crack binge. I was up half of the night with my head just racing. I finally fell asleep when the other girls started to get quiet. The morning came way too fast, and the rule was you had to get up at 7 a.m. You didn't have to leave, but you had to get up. A lot of the older women didn't even leave the shelter. They knew they had a place to stay and had nothing else to do all day, so they just hung out together at the shelter. I had to go upstairs for breakfast, which was okay. I'm not really a breakfast food person, but that morning, I was starving. I had the whole deal. Eggs, bacon, milk, you name it. After breakfast, I went out to smoke, and I noticed this tiny black girl with cornrows in her hair, and she had some cards in her back pocket. I had been playing cards since I was a kid. My dad taught me a few games. I played with friends, and I also had done some time in jail in the past. I was lonely, and I didn't know where anything was, and it was obvious I needed help. I asked her name and if she wanted to go play cards, and after about 2 games, we had a connection. She was cool and she liked me, so I was okay with that. I can be awkward around new people, and females tend to not like me, so I find it hard sometimes to make friends. She asked me after we played a few more games of Rummy if I wanted to go to McDonald's with her. I was cool with that because I needed to learn the area anyways. On the walk there, as we were talking, something caught my eye, so I looked up, and there was fucking Tyler with all my belongings in his truck, driving right by us. I tried to call, but he ignored me every time. Guess he was done with me for good this time. That crushed me. I wanted to fall to the ground and just sink till I disappear. But instead, I had about 10 different emotions running through my body all at once. I was so angry that he was just looking for a reason to leave me since the month before, when we broke up and I stayed with my dad for a while. He started seeing this Michelle. I was just absolutely devastated. We continued our walk to McDonald's as I was silent and broken. That night was easier to sleep because I was exhausted from not having any sleep and just feeling down. I slept like a baby, to be honest. The next day, Mesh wanted to show me this place she goes to get a good free lunch. The only thing was that it was a church, and we had to sit through a 30-minute sermon, which was cool with me. We were staying outside, waiting for the church to open their doors, and this blacked-out Mercedes-Benz with a trailer hauling a badass Harley pulled up and parked in front of the church. I then heard my loud-ass mouth say, "Damn, that's one fucking nice setup." I looked at Mesh and then looked back at the Harley. That's when I saw him. I specifically remember everyone knowing who he was. Will is what they called him. I remember getting excited to meet new people and be part of a new community. Everyone was really nice going into the church. A guy at the door walking in, giving us a prompt of meal times and service offers. I followed Mesh to one of the black pews and slid in behind her. The church was pretty. Different colors, and there was a choir singing in a low and almost quiet tone as people around us taking their seats. I kind of froze when that guy I saw come in. Will sat next to me. I looked at Mesh and then I quickly noticed his gold watch. It could have been fake, but it almost looked like a Rolex. He was an older black gentleman, talked real smooth when he introduced himself with his hand out. I was shocked that he wanted to shake my hand. None in my life does that. I shook his hand and they were creamy, like he takes very good care of them, and obviously does not work a physical demanding job. He was nicely dressed and had this pimp hat on like a fedora. It even had a feather in it. His cologne was strong but smelled good, like a man. He was handsome and smooth, and he was also very confident. Sitting through this sermon, I found it hard to pay attention to the preacher. I remember looking at his clean, shiny black leather shoes, and the socks were black and thick. When the service was finally over, people started heading into the dining area. I just followed Mesh through, and we got our food. She picked an empty space to eat on one of the ends of the long tables full of chairs. Not even 5 minutes, not paying attention to our surroundings, just eating, Will came over and sat 3 seats away from me. He looked at Mesh and said, "Do you mind?" I don't know how I didn't see the red flags. Of course I see them now, but looking back I was so clueless. He hardly said a word the whole time we were eating, and when he was done he got up and threw his stuff away, and I assumed he left. Mesh and I decided to go home, play some cards, and go to the closed bank she knew about. We were walking home and talking when he pulled up next to us. He rolled down his window and asked if we needed a ride home, but he was looking at me with a deep stare. I looked back at Mesh and she refused. Smart girl. I went with him. Dumb girl. I think I was more curious than anything. I had to know how he made that kind of money, and I remember wanting that. He drove around till my curfew and just talked. I don't know what it was. I think we had a lot in common and we related a lot. He asked me how I ended up at the shelter and just asked questions, so I told him. I don't know what it was. I'm not sure if I trusted him, but I told him about my past anyway, how I sold my body for drugs, how horrible it was, and I even said I was glad I don't do that anymore. He didn't say much about it, and we agreed that we would continue our talk the next day, and he would help me put in a couple of applications, and he had some errands too. I woke up in the morning to a text from Will that said, "What if you made that kind of money but spent it on yourself and not drugs? Everything you make will go to you building your life. Just think about it." I thought about it. I'm not going to say why I agreed and went with the idea that this would work and I could actually get my life together, get my kids back. $200 a half hour, I could be free. I chose to go with him. At that time, I think he thought I wanted to be with him, but really, I just wanted to be a way out of the situation I was in. I hated that stinky, loud shelter. I wanted out. He got a room at a motel and we dropped off my stuff, and he told me that I needed some new clothes. He did tell me he was just fired from a trucking company and he was a truck driver. He was currently trying to find another job as far as I knew. He took me shopping and got me a few new outfits, more or less outfits to take pictures in to bring in the money. I knew what I was getting into, and I was preparing my mind to handle everything that was about to happen. Will did tell me that if I went with him, I had to stay clean and have a clear mind to make money and be smart. Looking back at how manipulative he was and made me believe that I would do this to make my life better. I started doing this before I got addicted a few times to make rent or bills, so I knew I could mentally do it, but I was still unsure about where this was going to go. We got back to the hotel, and I do my thing, take my pictures and post them. It didn't take long before I started to get calls. I did make some money, and I kept every penny, and Will took me shopping. I remember those shoes I bought. They were black and gold baby fleets. Oh, I loved those shoes. I got like 6 or 7 cute outfits, some makeup, and hair dye. Remember, I came to the shelter with nothing, so being able to get all this stuff made me feel so good. I was confident in myself and hopeful that I could get a place and start a new life within a few weeks if days like this kept repeating themselves. Remembering how things went, I am starting to think that this was part of his game, making girls think that they can do it and keep all the money and then just trap them and make them need you. It's sick. He tricked me. He made me think I could finally live a clean life. Yeah, I was escorting, but I treated it like a job. I bought another phone so that I had a new number, and I used the Obama phone for work and turned it off at like 5 p.m. Well, I thought wrong. It was later that day I went back over to the shelter and grabbed the one shirt I had and some personal things and left with Will. That night was cool. He was super chill. We talked in separate beds and got a 2-bed, and he didn't act like he was interested in me like that, which I was happy about because I didn't want to be with anyone. I needed a break from emotional attachment. After Ty left me, I felt like I wouldn't trust anyone like that in a long time. So I was happy that I was comfy in the bed, watching TV, freshly showered, with money in my pocket. I had the best night's sleep, and I woke up to breakfast and time to get up and get myself together. He had gotten up early, went and got us breakfast and coffee. He ate with me and then left, said he'll be back in a couple hours, take my time and do what I gotta do. So I did just that. While he was gone, I dyed my hair and did the works. Not long after it was done and waited for him, the door opens and a female walks in. She's pale and has a beautiful face. Long, pretty blonde hair that ran down her shoulders. She was really petite, way too skinny and size B chest. Pretty big blue eyes that had dark circles under them. It looked like she'd been crying, and she was carrying a black trash bag that contained all her possessions. Will walked in behind her and introduced her as Anna, and she needed help too. He instructed me to get her together, get her pretty and take some pictures and post them. He then told her to go on and take a shower, and then asked to talk to me outside. We went outside the door, and as I was shutting it, his voice got real stern and said, "So you've not made any money yet, and why the hell is that?" I tried to explain that Sundays were the slowest day, and I would be lucky to make any money today. Before I could finish, he cut me off and said, "I don't give a fuck. You need to make some fucking money. What do you think, this hotel pays for itself? I will pay for it tonight, but from now on, you'll pay half and half of all the expenses. Now go make some fucking money." I couldn't even believe he was talking like this. I never seen him so mad, and his voice scared the hell out of me. I looked at him when he cuts me off, and I could see him get angry. His eyes got wide, and the white just disappeared, and they became all black. I was scared, but I did what he said. He then left me alone with her while he went out and got food and whatever he did. When Anna got out of the shower, her skin was more exposed as she walked out of the bathroom in a small towel. I knew she was an addict to an IV use. I assumed heroin. She confirmed it after I asked her if it was going to be a problem to not do drugs, because that was his rule for me. Why wouldn't it be the rule for the other girls? After my kid's father passed away from an overdose, I didn't like to surround myself with girls I knew I could get close to, trying to help and something happened. So I cut all that out, and when she told me, I was like, okay, no girl. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to make some calls because you can't stay here. At that point, I didn't even care what the fuck Will has to say. I didn't want her here, period. As soon as he came through the door, I stopped him and took him outside. I just told him I didn't think I could work with her. I didn't want to be around a heroin addict, or any kind of addict for that matter. He did make her pack her bathroom and clothes up and took her home. I think he was trying to please me for some reason, looking back at it. Will and I then took a ride to Main Street where all the girls walked and worked. It was so weird remembering how I said he knew everyone at church. He knew all those girls, business owners, police officers, and other men who drove drug dealer cars. I don't know why I didn't just run then. I'll never know. About an hour or two of driving around talking to a bunch of different girls, this random-ass girl jumps in the car. And it was crazy. They had known each other for years, I guess, and she had been looking for him and wanted to make some money. She was quite a bit older than me, but still really pretty, like beautiful. She had long, thick, curly, jet black hair. I didn't really get a look at her until we got back to the hotel. Will told me he wanted to get a few girls together and make some big money. I was always going to be number one, and I will never post with another female because I am the number one. He told me I was important and we were building our own family. Amy was tall and thick, but she was gorgeous. Big blue eyes, pretty skin, small waist with big round butt, and she was straight out bitch. She took benzo. She was prescribed to them. I guess he allowed it. It wasn't long before I couldn't help but watch her. She was popular, and like at night, she would be falling out and nodding off. It drove me crazy. I think I even started a fight with Will about it once. I didn't think it was fair, honestly. Like, bitch can get high, but I can't? Fuck you. What Will would do was during the day, he would leave me at the hotel to make money, and he took Amy to the streets and worked her. Well, it wasn't 2 days before they came home with another girl. A young one, 18. Her choice? No family. I only know what they tell me. Her name was Amanda. She was short like me and a little chunky, which was okay. Guys like chunky too. She had blonde, long hair and a cute face. She was sweet and didn't say much. I tried to get to know her a little better, but she wasn't around for long. I posted her with Amy and she didn't get much of a feedback. More people were calling Amy. Amanda stayed with us for a few days before she decided she wanted to go home. Will, Amy, and I didn't stay at that hotel for long. We ended up deep into the city, the furthest away from my hometown. Bigger room with a little nicer hotel with a view of the whole city. It had a shitty little microwave and a drive-up entrance to your room. Will and Amy brought home 2 girls that night. I don't remember them much because I wasn't involved with them much. I posted them, and the next few days we made money. Every time a girl would make money, they would give it to Will because he had them believe he was saving it for them and getting them anything they wanted. I continued to make money on my own, and I also gave him my money. I got conspicuous, and I will never forget the moment I knew I was not safe. I was outside smoking a cigarette. I wasn't out there long, but when I came back into my room, Will had all 3 girls posing on the bed as he was coaching them on how to pose and taking snaps of them. I didn't say a word and closed the door slowly. I didn't know why I felt the way I did, but it just didn't feel right. I don't know if he heard me open and close the door, but I heard him yell my name and said he needed me. He handed me his phone and told me to post the pictures. When I got on the website and tried to post the pictures and now wanted money instead of posting ads for free. Will unhappily ran to wherever and put money on a card. When I tried to put the card in, it wouldn't accept it and said it won bitcoins. I informed Will and even showed him the page that it wasn't going to post. He got furious and yelled at me. He turned and walked out of the room. I looked at everyone else and tried to apologize for his actions and to stay calm. It will be okay. He came right back in with a gun in his hand. I didn't even know he owned a gun. He hit me in the face with it and said I needed to find somewhere to post the ad or do it or I'm done, and then left. I don't know if he realized he did that in front of 3 other girls and didn't know what or I'm done meant either. I was fucking terrified, and that's when I knew I had to find a way to escape. I learned real quick that I wasn't able to just leave anytime I wanted anymore. After Amy got involved, Will changed. He started talking about taking us girls to New York and making big money, and travel and go here and there, and that alone scared the hell out of me. I wanted to build a life to get my kids back, not leave state to trick and maybe killed or abandoned. No, fuck that. I got fearful for my life when he hit me with that gun. I have been hit before, punched like a man, but I've never been hit with a gun. That night, I had a couple of dates set up and Will knew he had to take the girls and leave. I decided to try to make a plan to get away. The first date I made was $200. I put $50 in my purse and then put $50 in a pocket in my bra, hidden away. I left the rest on the table. The second date I made $150, put half hidden away and the rest on the table. Will came in the door not long after it was finished and grabbed the money off the table. My purse was sitting right there and I didn't see him do it, but he took that money out of my purse and said he had to do something and left again. That was when I made my escape. I made 100 calls before I finally reached someone who was willing to help me. He had a friend come and pick me up and bring me to his house. I will never forget the feeling I had when I was running out to the car with a trash bag full of stuff I had collected in the past 3 weeks. I was scared to death that he would come pulling up and see me. That feeling didn't leave me until we hit the highway. I wanted to tell this story because I've never been able to get through telling it. I couldn't help to think where I'd be if I stayed, and if I would even be alive. So, Will, let's never meet again. And a little side note from your friendly 2482. This is not kidnapping or abduction. This is human trafficking. I remember the story we had just a little while ago about the woman worried she was about to be human trafficked, but she was really about to be kidnapped if that was going to be the thing. This is what real human trafficking looks like. Gaining your trust, taking all the control from you, and making it very hard for you to get out. Normally there is drugs involved, but this time it wasn't. And I'm very happy OP got out. And thank you so much, OP, for sharing this story. I knew the child wasn't mine, and it was finally time to pass the divorce papers to my pleading, crying cheater of a wife. As I lay in my lonely apartment with a gun to my head, I heard of an arrest of a nurse who switched babies at birth at the same hospital my child was born. Stalker Stalking the Wrong Person by Vipas. Narrated by Phoenix Fire or Back to Ashes.
I'm a person with pretty long hair, but not female nor trans. There is a girl in my university class last year that has the same hair color as me. Black, long hair. She is quite popular and usually gets asked out a lot. Sometimes people confuse me with her due to us both having black hair, similar height, and similar hair length. She would sometimes tease me about having to worry about such long hair, but that's off topic. One night in February, I finished my homework and packed up since there was the term break. It was getting a little dark out, but I figured that a single kilometer walk to a friend's house wouldn't be dangerous. I used to play a bunch of sports in high school, so I feel like the close proximity to the campus, as well as my personal strength, were able to defend myself for just an hour. Canada, where I live, is quite safe, as many of you might know, so I walked on. It was around 10:30 when I started walking. Tons of students already left the campus beforehand, so there wasn't a lot of people traveling with me. Those who were probably just decided to spend another night in the dorms. My hometown is in British Columbia, and my university was far away, so I needed to board a plane to go back. Around 800 meters of walking later, I felt the presence of someone walking behind me. Suddenly, he put his arm around my neck and started choking me. It took me a good second to realize what was going on, and the person was choking me so hard I can feel my jugular vein expanding on the bottle due to lack of space for blood to go through. I kicked his poplita fossa, or however the hell you spell it, the back of the knee or the bottom of the thigh, I forgot. That made his knee bend forward, and he started falling to the ground. I back-kicked him on the balls, which is when he let go a little. Then I got out of his arms and started punching his face. In my adrenaline-filled moment, I thought he was gonna attack me again. So I punched him a few times to make sure he wouldn't get up, ran away, and called the police. Thankfully, I was okay, with no damage. The guy who'd beaten me was apparently a stalker, confusing me for the girl I mentioned above. He was arrested, however, I don't really know what happened to him. Although he did get charged with assault and stalking, however, my memory is a little faded. I hope this story can inspire others to not panic in a situation like this, but to get out of it ASAP.
As a police detective, my first wish was easy, to be able to look at someone and see what crimes they had committed. A week later, I gouged out my own eyes. He Was Watching Me by KAEraphernelia. This happened a few summers ago. My friends and I threw a going-away party for our friend that is going to migrate to Canada. We went to this island, and it was during the non-peak season, so that means that we were the only guests there. We arrived at the island just around after lunchtime. A few kilometers away from the resort, there is a small village just near the port. When we arrived to the said port, the resort service vehicle was not there. They alerted us they were going to be late because their vehicle broke down. So we decided to stop by this small store and bought some other necessities that we forgot to buy on the mainland. There was this group of men around their late 20s that were catcalling us. Our group consisted of 5 girls and 4 boys, and one came up to me and asked for my number. I refused politely, and one of my guy friends ushers me away from him. Thank heavens our service arrived, but he was still staring at me, and to be honest, it creeped me out. When we arrived at the resort, it had cottages that were on stilts. You had to climb a bamboo ladder to get in the room. It was also made from bamboo, just your typical hut. Even the floors were made from bamboo. The bathroom is separate from the huts and is for common use. We partied and I got tipsy because I'm a lightweight. I excused myself from the group and climbed up to the cottage to change into my swimwear. My friends really wanted to go island hopping, and I also planned to go swimming on the beach and island hop, just to lessen the buzz. I was not able to change since the room started spinning. I decided to take a nap instead. I told my friends to just go without me. It was a long debate because they didn't want to leave me all alone, but I insisted they should go. After a bit of begging, they went on to island hop without me. When I woke up, it was already around twilight. The resort was quiet. It was a bit dim inside the room. The resort had internal lights since electricity only runs via solar and generators. They only turn on the generators around 7 p.m. I can already feel the hangover. I used my phone's flashlight to help me see. I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I was sure that it was closed when my friends left. When I was about to close the door, the head of the guy from earlier popped out and he gave me that creepy smile and was still asking for my number. I told him to get out, but he was begging for my number. He even used his foot to stop the door from closing. I screamed and he kept saying in our language, which translates to, "Ma'am, let's fuck." I kept on screaming and I called my friends. What he said next made me shake. He said that my friends hadn't arrived yet. He had been standing there for hours, and he was watching us. I kept on screaming for the caretakers of the island. I screamed help, and finally I saw the beams of flashlights running towards us. He quickly left, and he ran towards the forest just behind the hut. I was shaking, to the point that I was not able to stand up. My friends arrived and the caretakers told my friends about what happened. They asked for help of the caretakers and the local chief of the island. They went on a manhunt to look for the guy. Sadly, he was not seen. We left the same night and just transferred to another island with a much more private resort. But, doctor, you said the sterilization went perfectly. How can I be pregnant? I knew you wouldn't understand the blessing of a child on your own. So I took it upon myself to help you fulfill your purpose. Cece's Pizza employee read my mind and told me exactly what I needed to hear. By MeaningSmartInGerman, narrated by Phoenix Fire Back to Ashes.
I love telling this story. I just never get the chance to tell it. So, in my freshman and sophomore years of high school, my film teacher and I did not get along. I was essentially an unstoppable force and he was an immovable object. I had my own way of working, my own ideas, my own way of doing things. Our assignment at the time of this story was a mini documentary. It was a Saturday and we were called into work. Yeah, I know. So we would get finished by the deadline. I was, admittedly, cutting it very close. I finished the assignment, but it was right as the deadline was about to be done. Looking back, I know it was shitty, but I wanted to die on the hill that I still did it. My film teacher absolutely blew up at me. He called my work ethic bad, suggested I should drop out for a semester because I'm not fit to do the course. You know, stuff like that. Basically, said I wasn't fit to be there. I was distraught. At that moment, I hated every single thing about myself. It was a cold day, and I remember crying outside, waiting for my mom to pick me up. Once she did, I told her everything that happened. She had to go to the hardware store, so she let me roam around a local Halloween, prop, and party store next to it. They were having a huge sale on Halloween items, as it was around December or January, and I got a bunch of stuff, including these black coffin-shaped sunglasses with roses and skulls on them. I fell in love with those cheap $1 sunglasses. I thought they made me look killer. After she got done, she went to a nearby CC's because she said it might cheer me up. We ate, it was fine. But here's where the weird part starts. I bring my coffin glasses inside, obviously, now that I'm obsessed with them. I have them on the bridge of my nose, putting them on because we were about to leave. Even though it was pitch black outside, whatever, 16-year-old me. A woman comes over to take our plates. She looks older, around her 60s. She beams at us as she takes our plates and cheerfully strikes up a conversation with us. She sees my coffin glasses and we get into a small discussion about how she used to know people who dressed like me when she was my age. I have a more alternative emo goth style look. But then, she looks directly into my eyes for the first time this conversation and says something along the lines of, "You need to love yourself, and the more haters you have, you're doing something right. Even if a certain someone tries to tear you down, it means you need to stand up and do what you love. That's the most important thing." In an instant, my expression falls. My mom smiled and made a noise of surprise. She realized it too. I'm speechless as I stare at her, not knowing how she knew what I needed to hear after my film teacher yelled at me for 5 minutes. That statement had nothing to do with the current conversation. Not once did she mention people hating on me for being alternative. She just said that, and I could feel it. She knew. She held my gaze for a few seconds as I was overwhelmed with emotion. I felt like crying again. But then, looking away and grinning, she just waved a hand and said, "Oh, but what do I know? I'm just a little old lady. Let me take your plates. Goodbye now." She takes our plates, winks at me, and leaves. That last statement sealed it. She knew that her words affected me. I've never forgotten what she said that day. I don't know how the hell she knew. I almost cried in the car again home, but happy tears. Thank you, CC's lady. Also, I should state, I did not look like I had been crying at the table. Me and my mom were only briefly discussing the events of that day, and she was never around to hear it. Also, in my junior year, I joined a different class my film teacher was offering, and I loved it. And we have a great relationship now, so shout out to him.
I was thirsty and tired after my daily 2-hour walk under the unforgiving African sun. But instead of the well where all the surrounding villages get their water, I was greeted by a barbed wire fence and armored guards. The guards' uniforms proudly showed their Nestle brand logo. Strange man tried to force me into an elevator. By Anonymoose. So this happened quite a long time ago, when I was just 20 years old. At the time, I was living alone in an apartment in a notorious building near the center of my city. It was Saturday night, and I had been going out with my friends and my now partner. Because it was past 4 a.m. already, he and his friend drove me and my close friend back to my building. She lived near me, so she only had to walk about 1 minute home, but it was difficult to get to by car. We said our goodbyes and my friend started walking towards her place, while his friend stayed in the car. We made out for a few minutes until some guy started hollering from one of the balconies of my building. I felt a bit embarrassed by having a public like that, so for me, that was the cue to say goodbye and go inside. I walked to the entrance, and as I entered the building, a guy walked down the stairs. I didn't think much of it, so I just pressed the button for the elevator, simply because I didn't feel like taking the stairs to the 6th floor, where I lived. The man, maybe a few years older than me, asked if I had a cigarette. I told him, no, sorry, to keep it short and simple. He just nodded, kept staring at me, and stood next to me waiting on the elevator. I felt creeped out by this, but decided to still wait for the elevator and just get home as fast as possible. At this point, I naively thought maybe he would just leave once the elevator arrived. However, he didn't. Once the elevator doors opened, he stepped in and just waited for me. I got inside the elevator and noticed he didn't press any button. I got a weird gut feeling, so I excused myself and told him I needed to call my friend. He grabbed my arm and tried to pull me back inside the elevator, saying, No, come here. I told him louder, let go, I really need to make this call. And I pulled my arm hard to free myself. I almost ran outside, but I didn't know where to go. I was afraid to go back inside, but it was so late, so I didn't feel safe outside either. I just started walking away from my complex and called my friend. She asked me where I was so she can come to me, but her phone died before I could answer. I didn't know my partner well back then, so I felt really uncomfortable and almost embarrassed to reach out to him, but I did anyways. The need to get somewhere safe was bigger than my embarrassment, and I didn't know anyone else who would still be up at this time. I texted him, and once he got to know what was going on, he and his friend came racing towards me. They were there within 5 minutes, parked the car, and escorted me back home. By the time we got to the building, the guy was nowhere to be found anymore. They still decided to escort me back to my apartment and stay with me for a while, until the sun came up and I felt comfortable enough to go to sleep. I had 3 locks on my door, so as soon as I left, I locked myself in and went to sleep. I reported it to my landlord, but he couldn't help me since the security camera often didn't work and happened to be offline that evening. I told him about the guys on the balcony as well, because I didn't know if he was one of the men and therefore saw me going in alone. But the landlord told me no one with that description lived on that side of the floor. Looking back at it, I'm so grateful for trusting my gut instinct and just getting the hell out of there. I don't know if he would have done anything, but it was a weird situation regardless, and it could have ended badly. I felt nothing but terror when I saw those eyes staring at me through the crack in the doorway. I can't believe it broke through another set of chains. The man stopped me from being kidnapped by Kadena-Kid. My mother was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base around the late 2010s, and being a military child at the age of 12, my life had reset once again. I didn't have any friends again, and I had to learn an entirely new neighborhood. It didn't really have anything that made me ecstatic. That is, except the Pokemon League held on base. It was ran by a few people who earned their judge cards from Nintendo, and held tournaments and just open game nights. It was really fun picking up the card game, playing in the video game. They even had a small gym and Elite Four system. I had a lot of friends, and one of them was one of the judges, who I'm thankful still to this day, because if it wasn't for him, I may not be here right now. The judge in question, who we'll call Professor Jitsu for the sake of keeping him anonymous, was a nice dude. He was the youngest of the three and wore a white professor getup. He looked maybe on the edge of his teens, early 20s, with dark hair and glasses and a skinny frame. He was extremely helpful to newcomers, sort of like the big brother we could all look up to and strive to beat in our children's cars and video games. Even if his game name was Jitsu, which was a bit nerdy even for him. He was always one of the last people to leave, helped to clean up, and he supposedly lived nearby. That last thing is important for what's about to happen. It was a bit of a cooler night when the event ended. I was sitting outside in the parking lot, scrolling through memes my friends texted me as I waited for my parents to arrive to pick me up. I was just kind of zoned out as the time clicked by when I heard someone nearby. Hey girly, you play Pokemon? I looked up at some really big dude, kinda chubby looking. I saw him every now and then at the events, and he didn't really stand out too much. I gave a small nod and said, yeah, I do, as he gave this wide smile, like creepy wide. He starts walking forward, and I'm hit with this nasty stench, like bad body odor. I blink a bit as I see him walking from a black sedan with its back door open. I got this cool card collection. Come here, let me show you. Now, my parents have always taught me stranger danger, but my kid brain thought, hey, he went to the events and I saw him, so this should be fine. At least, so I thought, until he grabbed my wrist and started to drag me to the sedan. To say I immediately started screaming is an understatement. Stinky didn't care though. He was still dragging me, saying how I will have fun, and throwing out things about trading cards, like someone listening would think that he was dealing with a whiny kid. I honestly thought I was going to be taken, and I would never see my mom and dad again. That I would be on the back of a milk carton and never seen ever again. Silly, I know, but I was rather sheltered about dying and death at the time. Thankfully, that's when Professor Getsu was walking out at that very moment, presumably on his way to walk home. All I know is I heard the sound of fabric hitting this dude's face as Professor had swung his professor coat right into the dude's face. I feel his hand go to where the dude's grabbing my arm, and I see his hand grip Stinky's pinky finger and yank back hard. Stinky let go and yelled like an animal as Professor pushed me back behind him as he yanked his coat off the dude. He then kicked at the back of the dude's knees and caused him to buckle as Professor grabbed his wrist and pulled back on them. Stinky groaned in even more pain as Professor looked at him with just cold look in his eyes. The big brother figure was gone and something else in its place, and I think I was a bit scared of it. Professor's tone of voice when he spoke didn't help either. It was like icy daggers lingering with his words against Stinky. If I see you back here or doing this shit to my charges, this will pale in comparison to what Japanese prisons will do to you. Stinky would scramble away and get into his car and peel out of the parking lot. Professor glared at him till he was out of sight. He would then guide me inside of the venue, buy me some fish and chips, and sit down with me until my parents arrived. That cold persona he had when he kicked that dude was gone, back to being the big brother I knew. To be frank, that frightened me. I didn't quite understand why the teenager was so aggro. I only later learned that Professor Getsu was a black belt who taught kids how to defend themselves with his mother at the local activity center. I suspect he has something of a protective persona, or something in his life that led him to act in such a way. He explained the situation to my folks when they arrived. I wasn't allowed to go to the events and league as much as I used to, but did from time to time. Professor Getsu was still his normal self at the events and helping people, but he would stop coming to events a year afterwards, his license having expired and his father moving out of the country soon after. Reaching about the same age he was, and with a little sibling of my own, I sympathized with how, for a brief moment, he became something terrifying just to make sure I was safe. Oh, and as for Stinky, he never did show up for any more events, and he was either banned or just scared of Professor Getsu. I wish the professor a good life, and I hope he's doing well. As for Stinky, I wish that we never meet ever again. I suppose it might have been a gimmick, but every time I open the book, Waldo seems to be in a different location. It took several more times before I noticed a few other people on the pages, and what appeared to be newly dug graves in the background. I think I may have prevented a possible attack or abduction by Destroyer's Offspring. This is something I never really told anyone about, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, so here it is. A few years back, between 2015 and 2016, when I was 18 to 19, I used to work at this little cafe inside of a car parts factory. It was basically a full-out but compact restaurant kitchen and lunchroom for the workers to eat there. Well, this one day, I get this call from my best friend / co-worker. She's all kinds of upset because of this creepy new temp worker that made her feel severely uncomfortable by asking her a bunch of personal questions, like what she drove, where she lived, if she was single, had any kids, when she gets off work, etc. She didn't want to walk out to her car alone. Mind you, she was my age too, 18 to 19, and this dude was in his mid to late 30s, if not already in his early 40s, and we're in Flint, Michigan, so we weren't about to take any chances. I drove up to the parking lot, find her car, park next to it, and she has a security guard escort her out. We didn't see the guy then, but she describes him to me and the guard, and that was that for a few days. Someone found him and told him to stay away from her, and he did. But then he met me. I knew exactly who he was as soon as he stepped up to the register to place his lunch order, just from the description I had been given and by the creepy vibes he was giving off. He pulled the same intense Q&A on me that he had done to my friend too, but instead of telling him to fuck off or called security or anything like that, I just told him a bunch of straight up lies. I told him I drove a blue 2012 Honda Civic, which I knew for a fact was one of the second shift manager's vehicles, who also parked near the front of the building. And so I knew that it was going to be there until second shift ended at 11 p.m. I also told them my shift ended at 9:30, which was really the time that I usually slipped out for a cigarette break. So when 9:30 hit later that night, I walked outside to smoke my cigarette, and I saw exactly what I was expecting to see. That stupid creep in the parking lot, close to the area that Honda Civic was sitting. He was just pacing back and forth behind two vehicles that were parked a few spaces down in the same row, playing on his phone the entire time. At one point, he glanced up and saw me staring at him, but I had my big leather winter coat and a hat on, so I don't know if he recognized me at first from a distance or not. I finished my smoke and went back inside and explained the entire situation to the security guards, one of which was the original guard that had escorted my friend out to her car a couple days before, and they were dying laughing at the fact that I had pulled one over on the prick and had actually caught him being shady. I'm not sure what exactly they did about it because I went back to work after that, but I do know that they immediately went out and confronted him in the parking lot, and that guy was fired the same week. To this day, I still don't know what his intentions were, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it couldn't have been anything good. So ultimately, the moral of the story is always have your friends back, and trust your instincts because if you don't, you could end up cornered in a parking lot and possibly attacked or abducted by some creepy guy who asked one too many questions. Edit, since I didn't include it originally. After my friend and I were informed that the guy was fired, we were told his full name and my friend paid to run a background check on him, and it came back with a violent criminal history of domestic abuse, assault and battery with a weapon, jail time served for violating a personal protection order, and parole, and some other things. Hopefully, this clarifies the fact that we weren't just picking up creepy vibes. From the witness stand, the little girl replied yes, her attacker was in the courtroom, and she could identify him. Muffled laughter broke out when she pointed at the judge instead of the defendant, as we all assumed she made a mistake. Unfortunate encounter I had with a doctor as a teen. By Emily is on the internet. This is my first time posting on here, so keep that in mind. I'm not really used to putting my thoughts into words. This story happened when I was in high school. I was 15 to 17. It was the end of lunch break and I was hurrying to class. I didn't really pay attention to my surroundings and I was speed walking, so I didn't notice the other student who was running across the hallway, and they ended up running into me. I fell down onto my lower back. The fall was pretty painful, so I went to the school nurse. I rested there for a bit and started to feel better after about an hour or so. The nurse called my dad and he decided to take me to the hospital. I told him I thought he was overreacting and that I'd be fine, but he insisted and came to pick me up from school. The hospital he drove me to was a children's hospital, so I was annoyed at being treated like a child, and I wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. After waiting a bit, me and my dad entered the doctor's office. There were 2 nurses, a doctor, me, and my dad in the room. I don't remember the details very well, but I think they needed to inspect the area of impact to decide if I need an x-ray or not. The doctor took me to a semi-closed off part of the room for inspection. It wasn't a separate room, but it had a wall so my dad and the nurses couldn't see us. It was my only direct interaction with this doctor, and it already felt like something was off when we stepped aside. He told me to lie face down, so I did that. And then the first weird thing he did was push my clothes and underwear aside so he could do the inspection. I didn't overthink it too much when it happened. It was kind of weird that he didn't let me do it, but then he just started the inspection and it went normally. for about 30 seconds. Then he told me really quiet something like, "This would be so much more fun if we were doing this to each other." I was so choked that I didn't know what to say. I just gave a short answer that would end the situation as soon as possible. And then the inspection ended. The doctor didn't do anything else, and I went back to living my life. I think about this whole thing sometimes, and what really bothers me is that I'll never have closure. I'm pretty sure I heard him correctly, but I really hope I misheard him, or that he misspoke or something. If I did hear him correctly, however, that could mean that there's so much worse than just what I experienced. This man worked, maybe still works, at a children's hospital. Maybe this is something he did regularly with other patients, and maybe it was something more than just saying fucked up things. Maybe he even did fucked up things. Unfortunately, I don't remember his name, and I couldn't find any documents from my visit to the hospital that day, so I probably will never know. But at the end of the day, I really hope I did mishear him, or that he no longer works there and face the consequences of his actions if he is an actual child predator. Having grown up with a violently abusive father, the man thought he'd never meet someone he hated more. As he watched the ambulance drive off with his bloody daughter, he finally realized he was wrong. Why was this red truck following me? By spoketherefore. I go on long walks near my home most nights. I live in a safe suburban neighborhood. It's a huge grid of residential streets in the middle of which is a big park-type area, larger than 2 football fields that's next to a school. Last night, around midnight, I was walking on the sidewalk next to the park listening to a podcast, slowly making my way to the school. The school has a big, well-lit parking lot in front, with 2 entrances/exits for about 25 yards apart. As I neared the school, I noticed a car in the parking lot with its headlights pointing towards the street. This is unusual for that time of night, especially on a weekday. Maybe it's a cop, I thought. I got closer and saw that it was a beat-up red truck. It had started slowly and aimlessly driving around the lot. As I passed the first entrance, the truck seemed to notice me and stop. I got halfway to the second entrance when the truck rushed towards it. I assumed the driver wanted to pull out before he had to wait for me to cross. No, the truck just sat there, idling as I approached. I got to the entrance and saw that the truck was occupied by 4 men. I motioned for the driver to go ahead, but while looking straight forward, he just motioned with his hand for me to cross. At the same time, I noticed a guy in the back seat staring at me menacingly. I crossed in front of the truck, expecting the driver to blow his horn or rev the engine, basically to fuck with me. He didn't. They just sat there, watching me. I continued down the road, and as I was turning right onto another street, the truck exited the lot, turning in the opposite direction. Just a strange encounter, I thought. A few minutes passed, and I saw the same truck approaching me. Getting to me would have required circling the park and traveling down 3 additional streets, and to do it so quickly would require serious speeding. The truck slowed as it approached, almost stopping as it got to me. The occupants stared daggers at me as they passed. It felt like they wanted to do something, but lost their nerve. Now I'm a little freaked out. Damn my wife for making me watch so much Crime ID, I thought to myself. I'm not a paranoid person, so I started rationalizing their behavior. I told myself they're just cruising around, enjoying some weed before going home for the night. That wouldn't have been out of the ordinary for my friends and me in high school. These guys looked too old for this, though. My gut insisted something was wrong. Out of an abundance of caution, I walked a little down the street and crouched behind a big oak tree surrounded by bushes on some random person's property. I know this is inappropriate and possibly dangerous. I hope the homeowner wasn't watching me from his Ring doorbell as I lurked on his property. For a couple minutes, I crouched there before I saw headlights. It was just the neighbor from across the street arriving home. He entered his house, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I actually felt pretty embarrassed. Just as I was about to stand up, I heard the rattling of an engine and saw headlights slowly moving down the street. It was the red truck. I'm sure I imagined it, but I thought I heard the brakes squeal right before my hiding spot. I wondered why the truck was apparently speeding to get to me and slow when it arrived. It didn't seem like chance, and I'm now convinced this truck is seeking me out. I started running as soon as the brake lights disappeared. I'm little more than half a mile from home, and I'm not taking any chances. As I turned onto the street that intersects with mine, I saw headlights and heard a familiar engine rattling. I can't say with certainty that it was the red truck, but I immediately turned around and ran to the side of another random house. Making things more ominous was the spooky music and the witch's cackle coming from the Halloween decoration next door. I waited another minute, making sure the red truck didn't pass, and then ran the rest of the way home. I walked in out of breath, and my wife asked me what happened. She scolded me for walking so late at night after I told her the story. The middle-aged woman is strong with her, so she immediately pulled out the Nextdoor app. Apparently, there had been several reports of car break-ins in our area attributed to men in a red truck. It's probably not connected, and I was almost certainly being dramatic. I doubt anything would have happened if I encountered the red truck again. Still, I'm glad I didn't. We named our baby Lily after the flowers that bloomed on the day she was born. Today, all the lilies in the garden withered, and she won't wake up. Peeping Tom / Stalker by owellwhatevrnevrmind. Backstory. I, female, was 13 at the time, but I looked more like I was 10. My grandma lived 2 states away and discovered she had stage 4 cancer. My mom packed me and my sisters up and drove us there while my dad stayed home for work. We were there for 3 months. My aunt and uncle lived in the same city as my grandma, so me and my sister would frequently spend the nights at one of my aunt's houses. One day, I was making lunch for my grandma when my uncle walked into the kitchen. He suddenly shouted and rushed out the back door. I caught a glimpse of a man in a red baseball hat running from the kitchen window. He had been watching me. My uncle claimed he didn't catch him. We found 2 piles of cigarette butts in the backyard, one by the kitchen window and one by the bathroom window. Yeah, my grandma didn't have blinds or curtains on any of her windows besides her bedroom windows. Needless to say, we were horrified. Fast forward a few days, and my mom was certain who the Peeping Tom was. My grandma's neighbor who always wore a red baseball hat, and had suddenly become smoking buddies with my uncle. We couldn't prove anything because my uncle backed him up, and we didn't want my grandma to be distressed, so we let it go. A couple days later, I was spending the night at one of my aunt's houses while my sisters were at another aunt's. It was just my cousin and I there while my aunt was at the store. I heard a car door and peeked out the window to see if it was my aunt. But I saw a man stand at the end of the empty driveway. He wore a red baseball hat, pulled over his eyes. My uncle had told him where I was. I was freaked. I locked the door and told my cousin to call her mom. She was on her way home, but the man was already gone. After that, I never left my mom's side. I stayed every night at my grandma's house. My dad flew up soon after, and that was the end of the incidents with my grandma's neighbor, because there was now a man in the house. And if my dad left for the store or something, he took me with him. It's been 14 years and many disturbing things have come to light. My uncle's a predator, and one of my sisters was one of his victims. My aunts knew and covered it for him. And a sister of mine, she's running the streets, using hard substance to self-medicate, and her son was taken away from her. My parents are absolutely devastated, and the guilt eats away at my mom every day. The new virtual reality world allowed you to anonymously jump into any other character's life and do whatever you wanted without any consequences. It was incredibly popular, not in the least because in the real world, crime rates had suddenly gone through the roof. Terrifying Halloween Night by Anonymoose. I apologize if there's some errors or things that may not make sense. This is the perspective of my story told from me in part by a friend. This happened to me the weekend of Halloween, and I personally don't like talking about it, but I've been told by my friend to share it to get it off my chest. My friend and I were invited to a house party just for college students in the richer area of town, so the house was huge with an acre of land and a pool area. This party was themed to be a little naughty, so my friend dressed in a sexy nurse outfit and I dressed as a belly dancer. Majority of the party took place in the house as there was maybe like 70 people, with the house being so very sparse. So not too difficult to get around. I'm not much of a drinker, but I did get some juice that was available. Some friends pulled me and my friend over to take some pictures, and I set my drink down. After what felt like an hour of just taking pictures, I found my cup and took another sip, not even worrying that I left the cup alone for a while. Then a man came up to me who looked like he was in his late 20s, early 30s. He said my boyfriend's name and said he'd been trying to call me. That's when I realized I didn't have my phone on me. I have loads of respect for my boyfriend. We always make sure to stay in contact with each other. And since he had to work, I promised I would contact him, but I just forgot. The man said it was urgent and said I could use his phone to call in one of the rooms. So, not thinking at all, I followed the man. If my boyfriend really wanted to call me, then I knew it would be something terrible. As we entered the room, I felt as if I just ran a mile and felt winded. The man closed the door behind me and sat me on the bed and gave me his phone. I started to feel weak, like I just got a migraine and just couldn't call. Then I was helped to lay down, and within seconds, I was out cold. I woke up later, not sure where I was or what even happened. I found my friend rubbing a napkin on my tummy while yelling. It took me a bit to come back to reality, and I realized in the bedroom while my friend was cleaning some stuff off of me. That's when I had a panic attack and just realized that I quite possibly had been used. My friend calmed me down and told me that didn't happen. She explained that she couldn't find me anywhere and assumed I went to the bathroom, but after a little time, I didn't show. She went looking for me, eventually checking the bedrooms, and found me laying on the bed with a guy taking something out of my belly button. Apparently, he was playing shots with my unconscious body of sucking alcohol out of my belly button, licking salt from my chest, and kissing my lips. She didn't know how long this went on for, but I immediately felt sick and even coughed up from just the thought. Thankfully, my boyfriend got off work early after my friend told him what happened. He picked me up while my friend asked around about the guy, but of course, no one knew him or recognized him. I was taken to urgent care and looked at. Thankfully, nothing was wrong with me, and the drug in my drink didn't cause any further harm than just knocking me out. I wish the story ended here, but I started to receive texts from a random guy. At first, he was just asking me random things, and I just didn't reply. But then he showed me a picture of my torso and started saying creepy things to me and even giving me the impression he's stalking me. This is still going on today, just texting me randomly. I've had the idea to bait him one of these days to finally have backup to catch him, but I don't know how smart he can be, and what he'll do if things don't go as planned. Edit. Thank you to everyone who reached out to me in the comments and DMs. It really makes me feel better knowing not every stranger out there is a creep. Because my past trauma and now this, I often find it hard to trust strangers. As far as an update, I stopped receiving texts from the guy just before Christmas. However, I often feel a weird sense that I'm being followed when I'm in public, and there have been a few instincts that I thought I'd seen the man again. I still am spooked at random times with random men looking at me for too long, but I've learned to get over my past traumas, so I hope to do the same with this one. I've contacted the police and asked what I can do. They took my phone in to copy the text I received, but I'm sort of doubtful it will go anywhere. I honestly just believe it was a stranger who had bad intentions at the time and acted upon it. I'm not really even upset anymore. I just want to continue with my life and better myself for any future events. Sorry, I didn't mean to make this update too extended. I don't think anything else will happen, but if it does, I will update when I can. Again, thank you so much, everyone. Robert told me he had me wrapped around his little finger. But now I have him in my palm, Serena told her best friend with a smirk. 2 days later, under the California sun, Robert's lifeless body was cut down from it. Creepy Apartment Chase by swampbitchh. This happened over 10 years ago, so excuse me if the details are a little fuzzy. When I was in high school, my friend Claire came over for a sleepover. We made some plans to sneak out and hang out with some guys, and then one of them would drive us home. We go to our friend's apartment, have some fun, and around midnight we decide it's time for us to head back. But when we ask to be taken back, everyone says no, despite previously agreeing to bringing us back. Everyone said they're too drunk or too high. So we eventually decide to just start walking back and make some phone calls to see if anyone could pick us up and bring us the rest of the way back. My house was a good 20 minutes away by car on the highway, so there was no way we were walking all the way back. The apartment was towards the back of the complex, so we start making our way to the entrance. We didn't even get halfway there before a car slowly started rolling up behind us. I was 15 or 16 at the time and very naive to the ways of the world, so I wasn't too concerned, but Claire was a little smarter than me on this night. She tells me to start walking faster, so we start walking faster. The car also picks up their pace behind us. Again, she tells me to walk even faster, so we start moving as fast as we can, and that's when the car pulls slightly in front of us and 2 of the passenger doors open and 2 men get out. Realizing there was no walking faster to get out of this situation, she instructs me to run now, so she takes off running and I follow her. She runs towards a group of parked cars and jumps behind a parked truck, and for a minute we hope and pray that we weren't spotted. This is when details get a little fuzzy. One of them must have gotten back in the car at some point, and there was only one of them following us behind the truck. We hear a set of footsteps quickly approaching, and she quietly indicates that we're now going into stealth mode. This man is on the other side of the truck that we're hiding behind. He's circling the truck looking for us, and we're slowly and quietly circling on the opposite side to avoid being spotted. It felt like a scene from a movie or a video game. We somehow managed to do 2 or 3 circles around the vehicle without being detected. And by the grace of God, he gives up and decides to go back to the car with his friends. This is our one shot to get away. She tells me to run again, so we run for what feels like an eternity, but in reality, it was probably like 15 to 20 seconds. We find the pool house area and find a spot to hide. We were hiding behind some fences and bushes and were anxiously waiting to see if they discovered us. Their car pulled around to the pool house and we're biting our nails hoping they don't stop and get out. The car slowly drives away and realize we hadn't been spotted. We're safe for now, but the car circled around the apartment complex for hours and hours and hours. They weren't giving up looking for us. So we're safe for the time being, but now we need to find a way out of there. It was the middle of winter, and of course, we had dressed to impress the guys we were hanging out with. So, short shorts and revealing tops. We were freezing. We found a dirty, disgusting Captain America blanket that we huddled up under while making phone calls to find someone to pick us up. We tried contacting the guys at the apartment, but no one answered our calls. None of our friends answered our calls. We felt completely alone and helpless. But at around 5 a.m., someone finally answered and said they would pick us up. The best news I had ever heard in my life. Our friend gets to the apartment complex, but can't find the pool house. The group of men is still constantly circling around, so there's no way we're coming out of hiding. We managed to figure out where our friend is with a little detective work. Figure out what building they're facing, what's in front of them, are there dumpsters nearby, etc. We figured out where they are, so we make a run for it. We spot their car and hop in as fast as we can. Go, 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 we tell them as our friend speeds off towards the entrance. We pass the group of men on the way out, and that was the last we saw of them. We made it back around 6 a.m., just in time to sneak back in without my parents even knowing we had left. If Claire hadn't been with me that night, I definitely would have been abducted, raped, and possibly killed. So thankful to Claire and our friend that picked us up, but a big fuck you to the adult men we went to hang out with as teenagers, and especially fuck you to the guys that intended to harm us. On a happier note, I'm now very diligent and aware of my surroundings, and we washed the dirty Captain America blanket and shared custody of it for years after this encounter. So, to the men who terrorized me and my friend in that shitty apartment complex, let's not meet again. For fuck's sakes, just go play with the neighbor's kid and your sister. It doesn't matter if you don't like the game. I snapped, losing my patience with my son. It wasn't until months later, when both of my kids developed bedwetting issues and refused to be seen naked, that I realized what the neighbor's kids meant by playing doctor. My Uncle is a Creep by Anonymoose. So, this isn't too creepy, I guess, but it creeps me the fuck out. I'm a 21 female, and my uncle is much older than me, early 40s. He's the youngest out of my dad's siblings. He saw me from birth up until I was 9. He was okay with me as a kid and never did anything creepy to me as far as I can remember. However, when my parents were together, my mother always warned me not to get too close to my uncle. When I was 9, I moved away with my mother to a completely different city up north and told me things about him and my grandfather. It made me feel gross hearing them, however, and I can't lie. I did doubt her as she had a tendency of exaggerating every story she told. Little did I know how right she was. When I became 18, my dad's family and I met up in my city at that time. It was great. I saw my cousin, who was a year older than me, and we catched up on what I missed. I interacted with my uncle again, too, and was friendly with him, just like everyone else in the family, though. I regret it now because he saw my fun side, and I guess that motivated him to interact with me more to bring that side out of me again. He looked much older and had grown a large gut and became almost bald. It had surprised me as he looked like your average TikTok star when he was younger. The meeting was okay, however, he began to act strangely with me afterwards. He always managed to find a way to touch me, such as putting a finger under my neck or chin to turn my face suddenly towards him, like a cheesy rom-com or something. It was not in the NSF areas, but he was always touchy. This to me was already a yellow flag, as our culture is strict and men don't touch women at all, not even in friendly manners. None of my other male relatives have behaved in the past like that, except kind of my grandfather. So he made me feel weird, and I had forgotten all of what my mother had told me about them. One time a particular incident occurred when I was at my cousin's house, and he was there too. My memory is hazy, but I remember him whispering a question about why am I so shy, and he was close to my neck when he said it. I could feel his hot breath on my neck, which made me break into a cold sweat. He wouldn't leave me alone and kept asking me questions, forcing me to interact. Another thing in our culture is that women are told to be hospitable and, well, not cause a scene, as that is extremely shameful, and the woman is blamed even for legit reasons. He would always make childish expressions at me whenever I accidentally would make eye contact with him, and I noticed he always kept staring right at me. The conversations he had would try to include me in some way, and he would ask me questions about it, even though I tried to make myself look busy. I think once he had breathed on me, I caught him looking through my purse when I was away from it, and he noticed and quickly acted as if he was doing nothing suspicious. Near the end of the day, I was on the sofa looking behind it and petting my cousin's cat. My uncle was leaving and wanted to say goodbye. I didn't think much of it, as he usually would just say goodbye and leave. However, he grabbed me by the waist and pulled me towards him. It felt pretty violating, as I was practically cornered due to the position of the sofa and him. He said something that I can't remember, as it was overpowered by the feeling of disgust, and I had towards him and panicked. What he was doing was not allowed in our culture. Men did not grab women by their waist, not even husbands with their wives. I tried to pull back, but he grabbed me harder, and it felt like he was feeling my waist. Even more, it freaked me out. And after he let me go and left, I turned around and saw that my dad had partly seen the ordeal. When I got home, I told him everything of what happened. My dad told me it was a good thing I came to him about it, and that he will talk to my grandmother about it so she can set him straight. However, sadly, nothing like that happened. To be honest, I knew that he wouldn't take it seriously due to how backwards our culture is, and I couldn't tell my cousins or aunts. They are extremely conservative and, well, very slut-shamey, and would certainly blame me for it, not my uncle. My dad instead always kept a distance between me and my uncle. He wouldn't let my uncle into the house if he knew I was in tops that were not completely modest, and told me not to open the door to him if I was home alone with my brother. My uncle's still creepy sometimes. He was recording a video of my little cousin's birthday like everyone else, but he spent some uncomfortable amount of time just filming me, and I was obviously uncomfortable. My dad did call me towards him, and he kept me under his watch whenever my uncle is near. Once, my uncle has come over and knocked like a wild man for us to open the door late so he could deliver some food our grandmother made, and did the same to our cousin. My dad had told him that we wouldn't open the door for him if we were home alone, but my uncle wasn't happy about that. The weird thing is that he just had a baby, though mysteriously his wife never met us or interacts with us. I also don't know why he chases after me specifically. He doesn't act like this with my cousin at all, and I'm no looker. I wish I had listened to my mother from the get-go and just steered clear of him since day one of meeting him again. I really hope someday I can get away from him. I think he's really creepy. I sadly don't think he'll get what he truly deserves due to my misogynistic culture. A few years ago, I gained the ability to detect someone's physical pain by eye contact and where the pain was in their body. As I looked at the cashier's eyes about to purchase my groceries, I noticed she had the worst pain I've ever seen on her whole body, yet has no reaction. Halloween Pub Crawl by Anonymoose. When I was in university, I went on a Halloween pub crawl with my friends, like one of those huge ones where they rent out multiple school buses. My friends in university were very much socially deemed hotter than me. One was a model before she got there. So for the first time in my life, I attempted a sexy Halloween costume. I was a witch and I had a hip-slip-long dress and fishnets. We went to some clubs with those multiple great metal floors. It was like 15 years ago. I don't remember. And we're already more than half cut from pre-drinking in the last 3 clubs. I got separated from my friends when I went to get drinks on the upper levels where the bar was less busy, and on my way back down, some guy dressed like Rick James asked me to dance with him. I poured my drink down my throat and decided to hit the dance floor. It went well for a while, but then he started grabbing my butt, putting me in leg humping positions while clamping me around my waist when I tried to move away. My friends below the platform I was on at this point were drunkenly wooing me on, so not knowing what else to do at this point, I humped the leg, bemused. While I was trying to figure out how to judo myself out of his drunken octopus grip, he screamed, "I'm Rick James, bitch!" in my face and inserted his fingers inside of me and held me down while trying to wiggle away. The song ended, he relaxed his grip, and I ran away and hid outside smoking until the buses were leaving, and then I was shaken up that I got on the wrong bus and ended up in the next bar with students from the university I didn't go to, and had to catch up with my friends 2 bars later. I was too stressed out, drunk, and trying to salvage the night to tell them right away, but I told them the next day. Cocaine is a hell of a drug. Happy Halloween? I asked if the cookies had any nuts, and my cousin said not to worry. I happily took a bite before I heard them say, "You've probably grown out of your allergy by now." And with that, our time together is coming to an end. First of all, if you have a story that you would like me to narrate, whether true or fiction, you can send it my way either through my subreddit, website, or email. All the links are down below for you guys. Second of all, I'd like to thank my patrons and members. You guys really help keep the lights on in this little tiny channel / podcast. Thank you guys so much as always. Last but never least, I'd like to thank the writers who let me read their stories originally. I remember each and every single one of these being creepy as all heck, and also thank Phoenix Fire, aka Back to Ashes, for lending his voice in this video back in the day for almost a year ago now. I truly love doing these compilations. They remind me of stories I read long ago and remind me of the thoughts I was thinking when I first narrated them / read them. And it's also a great way to see how I've changed over the years, though my narration, I think I found kinda how I like to do things. But every video, I try to do a little bit better than the last, whether that be with a thumbnail, how I narrate, other things. I'm always trying to reassess things and make things better, so you guys have a better listening experience. And as always, I hope all the writers stay safe and away from men and creeps that mean to do them harm in any way. Please remember to trust your gut, and if you feel unsafe, do whatever you need to get out of that situation. Be loud, be annoying, run away, whatever it takes, and never let them take you to a second location. Your chances of getting away or surviving become very low, so please keep that in mind. And yes, I know I'm a narrator of scary stories, but it doesn't mean you can't leave here with a little bit of info. Now, if you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, please subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. And of course, I would always love a comment. Tell me which one of these stories was your favorite, what you would like me to do in the future, or anything else, or just say hey. I truly love comments. If you're on the podcast, please leave me a review if you're on a platform that allows it. And if you're on Spotify, there are questions you can answer, but you can also use that area to leave comments if you like. And if you would like to help this channel/podcast grow, please share it with anyone who might enjoy it. It helps quite a bit and gets new ears listening to my spooky stories that I find over the internet for you. Sadly, mostly from Reddit, but not always just from Reddit. And if you'd like to support the channel like the people I mentioned before, I do have Patreon, memberships, PayPal, Buy Me Coffee, and Super Thanks on YouTube. All of that will never be expected, but always appreciated, guys. As I believe I've been saying since the day my channel became a thing, just having you guys watching and listening always has and always will mean the world to me. I love narrating these stories, guys. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.